What kind of pictures do we need, Rabbi? I'm sorry.
You'll see.
Okay, got it.
All right, Chavre, good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Maasros Perikei Halacha Gimel. We are heading towards the end of the Masechta. We're going to be learning today Daf Memhei, the second to last Daf. We happen to be on Mem Dalid Amid Beis, relatively high up in the Amid, 8 lines from the top of the Amid. And we just concluded yesterday's shir by introducing a sugya that's going to occupy a big bulk of today's Daf, and that is Machloikes Amoraim, Machloikes between Rabbi Yochanan and Eish Lakish, when one is Hamimoreach Kiryoi Shal Chaveroi Shaloi Midaitoi. So when we spoke so much about the importance, the halachic importance of the Gemar Melacha, and when it comes to grain, we learned in the Mishnah that its Gemar Melacha is not only when you put the kernels into a pile, but in many places, or in most places, the final step would be the smoothing of the pile. That's called mimoreach, similar to the word that we use by Meleches Shabbos, smoothing. And what were to happen if one person smooths, the Gabbai is not here to correct me yet, the pile of his fellow without his consent? Now, when we spoke out yesterday, these nuances will be important. The issue cannot only be about consent, and we had this topic before in the Masechta, because when someone is doing a step that we are allowed to say that the owner would have done anyways, to say that that step is without his consent would be inaccurate. More accurate would be without his knowledge. For certain things in halacha, you have to have both consent and knowledge. In our sugya, we're going to equate them, giving them the same weight, either or. So, yeah, there was consent, or there is some sort of presumed consent, but there was no knowledge. So do you need to have both? Or since there was consent, there is halachic consent, there will be consent, that suffices for that act to have its effect of bringing about the Gemar Melacha. So Rabbi Yochanan is the one that says nitbal, that yes, it did affect Gemar Melacha. And let's use these words because he says, yeah, there is this concept of consent. It's the opposite of Yu Shaloi Midas, right? When he'll find out, he'll be happy. And Reish Lakish is the one that says, no, it's not enough. Even if I'll give you that might be considered consent halachically, it's not enough just consent. You also have to have the knowledge of the owner. That was the machlokes between them. And the big bulk of today's daf will be a back and forth. We're going to first challenge Rabbi Yochanan, and then at some point we're going to switch. We're going to challenge Reish Lakish from a series of different halachas. We're going to begin to learn today the challenge against Rabbi Yochanan from Challah. Now, when it comes to Challah, this is something that we are familiar with because we actually practice the mitzvah of Challah, even chutz la'aretz, even though it's only midrabanan. There is a minimum amount of dough needed for one to be obligated to separate Challah, even though it's only midrabanan. This minimum amount is equally chutz la'aretz. It's equally in Eretz Yisrael. On the side, there is a big machlokes whether in Eretz Yisrael currently there is a chiyuv to separate Challah midoraisa or midrabanan. You certainly need to have the majority of the Jewish people living there. Maybe you also need to have the majority of the Jewish people entering at the same time. That's the whole sugya called Bias Kulcham, which only happened under the leadership of Yehoshua. Even Bisman Ezra, not the majority of the Jews lived in Israel, nor was there an entrance of the majority at the same time. This is a relevant machlokes because nowadays we are living at a time where either we got there or we are about to get to the place where the majority of the Jewish people are living in the Holy Land. If what's needed is that, then the obligation of separating Challah will be upgraded in the Holy Land to a biblical obligation. If you have to have bias kulchem, then it's going to happen when there's going to be the mass kibbutz golius, which is connected to the coming of Mashiach. Many Jews are moving to Israel, but it's not en massa. It's one and many, but not a bulk of millions of people at the same time. We'll just leave it at that. It's not negate to our topic. Our topic is that there is the minimum amount required for you to be obligated to separate challah. anywhere between 2.5 and 5 pounds. Actually, by us in Chabad, once you make a dough from 2.5 pounds of flour, you already separate challah, but you don't make the bracha. Once you have a dough made, once you make a dough from 5 pounds or more of flour, not only do you separate challah, but you make a bracha. Now, the Mishnah will discuss a scenario where people are not making their own dough. Actually, people are not looking for dough, they're looking for sourdough. I know that nowadays it became a big thing about the sourdough challah, the sourdough. The sourdough that we will be talking about in the Mishnah and challah are people who want to have in their home what we might even call yeast. They want to have a piece of dough that's extremely sour, and when they want to make dough, they put a little piece of that in it, and it's like a starter. It makes all of that ferment a lot quicker, a lot better. The making of the sourdough is not being done by the owner. A couple of families go over to a baker. They give the baker the raw material, and they tell the baker, please make for us the sourdough and give it to us. The quantity that each one gave to the baker, let's use our lashonis, is less than 2.5 pounds. Let's just say each one gave the baker 1 pound. Had they done it, had the baker done each one separately, there would not have been the required amount to separate challah on any level. What did the baker do? The baker took from each family the 1 pound. He has now, let's say there were 5 families. Now he has 5 pounds. Just the Mishnah doesn't give a number, but let's use that as an example. He made the sourdough, and then he gave each family back 1/5 of what he had. The Gemara will equate the chiyuv of separating challah from that dough to our case of hamimoreach kiryoy shel chaveroy shaloi midati, and it makes perfect sense to make that correlation. Why does it make perfect sense? Because the family that gave their dough, their flour, for the baker to turn it into sourdough, so'oid, real sharp, yeasty dough, they did not know that he's going to combine it with other people's doughs. Now, here it's already more than just no knowledge. You can even argue that there wasn't even consent. It's not that their sourdough will be better because of it. It won't. It facilitated the job of the baker, and maybe even that not. I don't know. Maybe, yeah, that's not the point. But the Gemara will be making that equation. The Gemara will not be going into the differences between consent and knowledge. The Gemara, the Bavli does that a lot more than the Yerushalmi. Here we're going to accept this correlation. And by the fact that the Mishnah over there says that there no challah has to be separated, that will be a challenge against Rabbi Yechanan. Makes a lot of sense. According to Rabbi Yechanan, that says that if I do Gemar Malacha to your grain without your knowledge, Rabbi Yechanan says nitbal. So l'cha'ira, the baker, Taka, he put together the quantities without the consent nor the knowledge of the owners of the flour, but he did it. He brought it by challah. The chiyuv challah is chal when you knead the water into the flour with the minimum amount. He did that for someone else's flour. So that will be the issue, and basically, just to say it by heart, the difference that Rabbi Yechanan will come to is that over there in challah, the baker from the outset, who Taka gathered all the flour together, never planned to leave it gathered together. He needed to return to each one their flour, their weight, their quantity. So it was put together with the kavana to take it apart. Over here, when you smooth the pile of your fellow, the kavana, not only theoretically, but even practically, is not to do it for it to be undone. That will be the crux of the back and forth of challah, and all of that is brought over here because we're going to bring our Mishnah of the ant hole near the smooth pile, which, as we learned in the Mishnah, that Mishnah says that you're chayiv to be ma'asid from the kernels in the ant hole. That implies that if there is an ant hole or an ant mountain near a pile that was not smoothed, the Mishnah doesn't say that, but that's what we're implying, then you won't have to tithe the kernels. Why not? The Gemara is going to ask that the ants, the havamina of the Gemara is that when the ants take the kernels, even if the kernels are in their husks, the ants will bring those kernels to its Gemar Malacha. They're going to separate the chaff from the kernel. And we should consider the kernels in the ant-hole as now it reached its Gemar Malachim. It's ready to be eaten by the ants. It's Gavaldik. So what difference does it make whether a human being brings someone else's produce to its Gemar Malacha or whether animals bring someone else's produce into Gemar Malacha? L'chayda, again, according to Rabbi Yechanan, that says nitbal, even if the ant-hole would be near the pile that's patur, because it wasn't yet smooth, they should still be chayv to be ma'aser. Fascinating. Anyway, that's going to be, and there's going to be a lot more back and forth, challenges against Reish Lakish. Then the Gemara is going to go on to identify the various vegetables that the Mishnah said that even though they are being sold in the marketplaces in the Holy Land, and even though the rule is that produce that's imported into Eretz Yisrael has to be tithed midrabanan because the person who buys it doesn't know that it came from outside of the Holy Land. But the Mishnah enumerated various vegetables that in the times of the Mishnah, that was never grown in Israel. Not because you couldn't, because it wasn't. So since everyone knows, this type of garlic, that type of onion, for sure, was imported, then even midrabanan, you don't have to tithe it. The Gemara is going to identify these items. And the final topic of today, which will really be fascinating, will be there's a Rashbag in a Braisa, in a Tosefta, a Tana, Rab Shimon ben Gamliel. And he says that in the natural world, nothing is square. Everything is circular. Or not square. We'll see how that's going to be Negeya. And there's going to be a lot of pushback. The Gemara is going to start speaking about vegetables. I'm happy we have Kevan and different trees, trunks that are square. And we're going to have to deal with that. And then I'll speak at the end about the Rebbe Shita, about the Menorah and the Beis Hamikdash, but we'll get there about the circular or whether the square, straight, which is the human mark on the world. But we'll leave that for the end of today. Sheikh Evradaf Mem Dalid, Amid Beis. Again, I know we're high up, but that's fine. 8 lines from the top of the Amid. Again, in the machlekes of one smoothing someone else's pile without they don't know about it. Which means they have no knowledge of it. Rabbi Yechanan says nitbal, Reish Lakish says loy nitbal. So the Gemara now, masiv Reish Lakish le Rabbi Yechanan. I just want people to take a look how, again, until recently, there was a confusion in what is the correct version in the text of the Yerushalmi. And it's amazing how others had a girsa that the following wasn't a question against Rabbi Yechanan, it was a question against Reish Lakish. And people who had that text, when they learned the Mishnah that we're going to quote that we said in the intro from Masechtas Chala, there is a way of using it in the opposite direction. But it's unsettling. If you can go this way and you can go that way, then you're going no way. That's why we have to just establish the text. And our text, the established text is that this is a kasha that Reish Lakish asked against Rabbi Yechanan, that you say nitbal v'hataninon, but we learned, and this is the Mishnah in Masechtas Chala, v'chein nashim, women, this is just a diber hakasuv b'hoiva, doesn't mean women, it can be men, but that's the halach yelech, at least in the times of Chazal, that the women were the ones baking the bread. I know many people right over here are saying, no, I bake the bread, but we'll leave it at that. It doesn't matter. If women that gave to a baker, they gave them the raw material, which is flour and water and whatever else. La sois lehem so'oir, to prepare sourdough for them. Again, this is not what you think sourdough challah. This is that the balabas, the woman, she wanted to have a piece of very so'oir dika dough. So when she will later make bread or bake challah, she'll take little pieces of it, more or less what we do now with yeast, and she'll put it in it for it to be a starter. Even though you don't need anything for things to be chametz, we're coming into Pesach, just mixing flour with water, and you let it sit for a very short amount of time. Wheat, we go now with 18 minutes. Barley, much quicker. That's why, by the way, you're not going to find barley matzah. You're not going to find barley matzah because the Chazal say, we learned this in the Gemara, the time that it takes for it to become a halachic chametz steak is much quicker. That's not with cold water. If it's warm water, even quicker. But anyways, coming back over here. So the Mishnah says, Im ein b'shel achas mehem kishir. If the contribution of each of these women, in our example, there were 5 women. Every woman gave 1 pound of flour. Okay. So then, even though the baker, when he received the total of the 5 pounds, mixed them all together, made the sourdough prior to breaking it up again into 5 parts and giving each woman back their raw material in the form of sourdough. So the Mishnah says that at no point is there an obligation to remove chal. P'turim min hachal. End of quote. Obvious. So asks the Gemara again, in our girsa, how it worked the other way, you got to figure that out, but we're not going that way. We're going in this way. Ve'ein, bishel, kulhem, kishir. But is the Mishnah not also talking about the scenario? That when the baker did combine prior to returning it, did he not have also, can it not also be about, in our case, 5 women, each one giving a pound? In other words, there was the gemar melacha, that's machayev challah, which is needed flour and water with the right amount, which you had here. Nevertheless, the Mishnah is saying that there was never a moment in which that which the baker had was obligated to have challah removed from it. Why not? Must be because he never notified these women that when he's going to make sourdough with their raw material, he's going to combine it with other people's flour. They don't know that. They don't consent to that. Or one or the other, or both, however you're going to go into the lumdus here. And therefore, even though it happened, it's as if it didn't happen. It cannot bring about the chiyuv challah. Loy nitbal. Sounds like Reish Lakish. This goes against Rabbi Yechanan. So Rabbi Yechanan responded, no, the big difference is, over there in challah shekein ha'oisa isam, the baker who's preparing the sourdough is doing it from the beginning with the intention, al menas lechalka isa. He has to give each woman back their weight. That means he's putting it together temporarily, which is why even while it's together, p'turim min hachala. And that differentiates that case in the case of the machloikes, hamimoreach kiryoy shel chaveroi sheloi midaitoi. What you did is going to stay the way you did it. It's not going to get unsmoothed. Gewaltig. Says the Gemara, right? We're not done yet. I still have a problem. Again, from Reish Lakish, in our version, against Rabbi Yechanan. Again, from another Mishnah, in Masechtas Challah, that nachtoim she'asa so'or lechalik. Here, we're speaking not about a nachtoim that was simply servicing other people's flour. Here, we're speaking about a baker that invested. He bought his own flour. He made sourdough, because that's one of the things that people want to buy in a bakery in the days of old. They would go into a bakery, each one would buy a piece of sourdough. So the Mishnah says that if the nachtoim, so let's go about the 5 pounds or the 10 pounds, he has his own flour, he gathered it together, he made out of it sourdough. The way it worked was that no one bought this large amount. People needed just a little piece. The Mishnah says chayiv b'challah, because it belongs to the nachtoim. Now, what are you, Rabbi Yechanan, saying? That when a person makes, in the case of challah, where the gemar melacha, lehilchos challah, is the kneading of the flour and the water with the minimum amount. Let's go with my 5 pounds for you to be chayv bracha. Many people say even 4 pounds is chayv bracha. I know there's a big machlokes about this. Well, here the nachtoim is also making it to sell little bits of it. If when you are putting something together with the intention of breaking it apart, halachically we never view it as fully combined together. So even in that case, it should be exempt from challah. By the fact that the Mishnah does not say it, argues Reish Lakish, is your understanding is wrong. Your understanding is wrong. That the only reason why you should be exempt from challah, not because you're going to break it apart, is because in that first Mishnah that we quoted today, he did it without the consent / knowledge of the women who gave it to him. Here, it's his. You're wrong. To which Rabbi Yechanan responds, Oichet nicht. Amalei, loitis veni nachlim. Don't refute my understanding from this Mishnah of the nachlim that out of his own pocket invested and bought a large amount of flour, etc. Because nachlim loy bedatoi hadavar toli. You cannot say that the nachlim will break his sourdough into pieces. No, the purpose of the nachlim is to do business. If someone is going to walk into the bakery and tell the nachlim, I want to buy the whole sourdough that you made, will he not? Of course he'll sell it to him. Who is the one that will determine whether he's going to break it into pieces and into what size pieces? The purchaser, the customer, not him. That's the difference. So when he combines it together from his perspective, Adarabba, he wishes, like any businessman, why do I have to work so hard? Hashem should bless me. One customer should come, buy my whole stock, and Shalom Al Yisrael, I can go sit and learn. Oh, that's Gavaldic answer. Bedas halakuchais adavar tali. Shema yimso lakuchais. Maybe he's going to find a type of lakucha, a type of customer that won't want it to be divided. And he'll agree, even if he has to give a discounted price, it's just a much less labor. And therefore, v'yitvol miyad, Gavaldik. Masha'enkin, when the Nachlaim takes the dough from different, in our example, 5 different women, the Mishnah doesn't say the number 5, but in our case, he has to divide it for them. It's not his. He has to give back to each woman what they gave to him. That's the difference. So Rabbi Yechanan stands his ground. And that's the difference. When you know you will undo it, that is when the doing it doesn't count. If you don't know you're going to undo it, even though you might undo it, you probably will undo it, but you don't know for sure, then the combination is valid.
The obligation to buy the associated with dough with an individual.
Has to do with the dough.
Doesn't matter who does the tithing, whether it's the baker or the purchaser.
Doesn't make a difference who does the tithing, even though the obligation initially is on the one that's going to do the kneading. But in challah, just to know the rule that if, for whatever reason, right or wrong, the one who kneaded the dough did not remove challah, then the obligation doesn't evaporate. Even when it's baked, and I always mention this, that when we make matzah, lechatchila, we do it after it's baked, because since there is this rush of not allowing the flour and the dough to sit for the amount of time that will turn it into chametz, it's going to rise even just a little bit, even though there's no yeast and there's no sourdough. But any flour and water together sitting rises. First of all, it doesn't sit. They're always moving it. Second of all, on top of that, they don't remove challah. Removing challah will take what? 10 seconds? They don't want to do that. What do? They make a batch. You have to remove challah from the batch. From the batch. So however big the batch is, I don't know, let's say that every time they make a mixture of flour and water, let's say that produces 30 matzahs. I'm just giving a guess. Okay. Those 30 matzahs, after all of them are baked, they're going to be gathered in a basket. And then you're going to remove challah from a piece of one of the matzah for all of the matzahs. And the same thing would be with challah. You gather it and you remove it. Another little detail that even though everyone knows that when challah is being removed on a biblical level, midrabanan, there is a minimum amount required, which is either a 24th or 48th. Balabas, 1 from 48. Nachlaim, the other way around. Balabas, 1 from 24. Which is almost 4, a bigger amount. A baker who's doing a lot more, the gift will be big even if he gives less. Gives 1 from 48. We women today, men today that remove challah are not machaven to any shiurim. That's because the challah is going to be, first of all, it's midrabanan. Second of all, because it's tummy, which means the kohen is not going to have it anyways. We're going to end up burning it. Because of that, now we just take off the fistful of challah. Okay. Says the Gemara. Why are we having all of this? I know it's a ma'aser discussion that you hamemorech kirya shal chaveira. We're having this discussion here because it's connected to our Mishnah, to the Antol. Amalei, again, the Shlakish is challenging Rabbi Yechanan. No, you're wrong. The Hatani, did we not learn in our Mishnah? The question will be from the implied rule of the Mishnah. The Mishnah explicitly says, tunnels and tunnels, shalonu, that were even only one night, overnighted near a arema ha-chayeves. If it was near a pile that was already chayiv in meiser, which would mean a pile that was already smooth. So the Mishnah says the kernels that you find inside the antol, even if you find a large amount, the antol was only let's say the arema near it was only here overnight. The antol could have been here for a long time. But this pile was only put last night. So that's another reason why one might have said, well, if there's so much kernels in the antol, they didn't begin gathering it last night. They began a month ago. It's from other piles. None of the others, that's the case. None of the others were smooth. The Mishnah says we don't say that. Ants are Gavaldika workers, and we will say that what they can accomplish in one night is unbelievable. And all of the kernels came from the pile nearby. And when there's something nearby, they don't go to anything further. Not because they're lazy. They're not lazy, to save time, to produce more. So we say that all of the kernels in the antol came from that pile and it's chayiv. Now, what does that imply? The kasha is from the implication that if the ant hole would be bitzad arema petura, if the ant hole was near a pile that didn't yet reach its gemar malacha, okay, now I know you can argue it wasn't smoothed. Well, let's go more. It was next to grain that didn't even have the kernels separated from the chaff, whichever place. So then the din will be pturin. Why pturin? Because the kernels are not kernels that reached its gemar malacha. Now, what's the kasha? Again, this is, you have to, the Yerushalmi doesn't elaborate. The kasha is, according to the Shlakish, whatever gemar malacha accomplishes by what's gemar malacha, not the last step, the whole thing, you process it and you bring it to the end of its process. You separate the chaff, you remove the chaff, you put it into a pile and you smooth it. The Shlakish understands that whatever that is, that's exactly what the ants do. The ants remove the klipa from the kernel. The ants put it in a pile, not in the big pile, but they organize it, and that should be gemar malacha with one problem, that it's being done by animals. It's being done by ants. It's not being done with the consent and knowledge of the owner. You can even say it's not being done with the consent and knowledge of humans. But according to you, Rabbi Yochanan, that we don't need any of that. If I do yours, it's done. Bottom line is, it reached its gemar malacha. That's his kasha. The ants gathering into the ant hole should be its gemar malacha for these kernels in there. No, of course not. In other words, when you find that, all you need to do is eat it. It's packaged. Okay, so the Gemara says, Daf Mem Hey, today's Daf. No. I'm going to give you two different understandings in the Mishnah. The first one we quoted when we learned the Mishnah. And that is, the issue is not about prior to Gemar Malacha, post Gemar Malacha. No. There's a bigger rule. The rule is that when kernels become ownerless, Hefker doesn't have to be tithed at all. Now, we also mentioned time and again, that it became ownerless before Gemar Malacha. If something reached Gemar Malacha and then it became ownerless, however, it became ownerless, then when you find it, you have to tithe it. That's the point. The point is that when ants take the kernels away from your pile, the owner gives up hope of ever getting it back. This is called Yush. So you're right, Rabbi Yochanan. It says, Rabbi Yochanan says to himself, I'm right. The ants brought it to its gemar malacha. So what? But when that happened in the ant hole, it had no owner. The reason for our Mishnah's correct implied law is because of the rule of Yush, which is the rule of Hefker. And by the way, we know that Yush doesn't have to be exactly like Hefker. There's a Tosfos about that, but that doesn't matter for our sugi.
In this case,
it reached its gemar malacha when it was ownerless. And then you went into the ant hole and you got it out. Doesn't matter. But since it reached its gemar malacha, it became ownerless before gemar malacha. That's the rule.
they take the grain that comes over. They arrive with the grain.
They make gemar malacha, but it became ownerless the moment they took it. Shmuel bar Abu Amar. No, I disagree with that. And I'll give you a reason why he might disagree with that. I would argue that if I would be an owner, you have to be a farmer, and I see a big ant hole near my pile of grain, I'm not going to have Yush if I know how to go into ant holes. Why would I have Yush? I know exactly where the kernels are. I know that there'll be some kernels in there. So it's not about Yush versus not Yush. Maybe he holds that it doesn't become ownerless. What does it become? The Mishnah's implied law is dafke. When you went into the ant hole and you found the kernels, they weren't fully processed. Don't think the ants is a whole seder. They have a whole factory. The ants didn't yet remove the chaff. That's why the Mishnah says it's butter. That they drag the kernel with the husks. It's not about just them dragging it with the husks. Because if the only step needed would be the smoothing, it's self-understood that once the ants deposit it in the ant tunnel, that's the smoothing. They deposited it, but they didn't remove the husk yet. They didn't get to it yet. And now you found it. So it's exempt because it didn't yet have Gemar Malacha. If a taka would have reached the Gemar Malacha, argues Rabbi Yochanan, then even there you would be chayv to be ma'aser it. Atkan, are the challenges in our girsa from Reish Lakish against Rabbi Yechanan. And Kedarke B'Kodesh, I don't think Rabbi Yechanan was just sitting on the defensive. Rabbi Yechanan now is going on the offensive. So now, Masiv, our version, Rabbi Yechanan L'Shon Ben Lakish. You Reish Lakish say loy nitbal. Yeah, for Hatanina, did we not learn a Mishnah and Peah? The Mishnah and Peah is mamish speaking about Meiser, but we're speaking about another rule of Meiser, which is that just like if any product became hefked prior to its gemar malacha, it will never be chayiv to be tithed. Similarly, if a product was consecrated to the Beis Hamikdash, it became hegdish. And while under the ownership of Hegdish, it reached its Gemar Malacha, but it was given over to the Hegdish prior to the Gemar Malacha, even after someone redeems it, it will always remain exempted from Meisers. It's very similar. In other words, the Chiyuv of Meisers is only Shayach when at the moment of the obligation going into effect, the obligation went into effect because it was owned by a commoner. It was owned and by a commoner. Not ownerless or owned by God. So that we learned befedish in a Mishnah that hegdish and acholei nigmaru, that if a person let's just apply this to grain, but it's not only about grain. Someone had a pile that was not yet smoothed, and then they were magdish it. Happened to be that the gizbar, which is the name of the Gabbai Tzedakah in the Beis Hamikdash, the temple treasurer. I mean, the Beis Hamikdash doesn't need the grain. The Beis Hamikdash needs the money, but they're going to sell it. But sometimes it's worth it for the people working in the temple to do a little bit of work. And all of a sudden, they get even more money, which is what happened. So, Ugemar and Hagizbar, even though afterwards someone redeemed it, those grains were never tithed yet. So the rule is, the Mishnah says, those grains never have to be tithed. That's the rule. Why? Because it reached its Gemar Malacha when it belonged to Hegdish. Now we have a bomb question. How are we to understand the relationship between the Gabbai, or the Gizbar, and the temple property? I'm happy the Gabbai is not here, because even though it's a machlekes tanoim, it's a machlekes in reality ad hayom hazeh. Every Gabbai feels, and the Gabbai has a leg to stand on, that he's the balabas. He's the owner. In other words, what's the whole topic? If someone who's not the owner brought it to a Gemar Malacha, according to the Shlakish that says only the owner can bring it to the Gemar Malacha, if we are not going to view the Gabbai, the Gizbar, as the owner, so what if the Gizbar brought it to the Gemar Malacha? What he did is nothing. It's as if he didn't do it. And if it's as if he didn't do it, then the halacha should be that later when you redeem it, you can't say it's never going to be obligated. Let's go with the possibility that if you're going to re-smooth it, let's go with that, then you should be chayiv. The Gizbar is not the owner, and therefore, what he did should be ineffective. But that's not what the Mishnah is saying. The Mishnah is saying, no, what he did is Gemar Malacha. And since the Gemar Malacha happened while it belonged to Hegdish, it's forever going to be exempt. The Gemar Malacha is halachically should not be taken into account according to you, Reish Lakish. This is a good question. And the answer of Reish Lakish is that this is part of their machlekes. Reish Lakish, this is machlekes tanoim. Amalei tiftoir. I will interpret the basis, the premise of this mission, of this halacha, is Kamanda Amar, Gizbar is Kiba'alim. So happy the Gabbai is not here because, is he going to use it? He's the owner. Even though he's not the owner. But he's enough balabas. So he is not the other guy doing it. He's the one doing it. And that will not be like Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi is the one that says that Gizbar Acher. Now, even according to Rabbi Yossi, make no mistake, the Gizbar, what we call a Gabbai, is a caretaker. It's like a public servant. Like, is the public servant the servant? Or is the public servant the boss? Depends who you ask. The citizens will say, you're just a public servant. But the politician, Lahavdil, is going to say, what are you talking about? I'm the decision maker. I'm the balabas. Machloikis. Beautiful. Okay, that was his way out. For some reason, again, the way this was put together, one thing is clear, that the Yerushalmi wasn't fully finalized, not only in quantity. It's possible that prior to some intended final revision, they scraped the whole project because of the religious persecution in Israel, compounded with the knowledge that in Bavel, they're putting together a Talmud. So just the order, the Gemara now is going to go back to the first challenge we had today from the first Mishnah in Chala against Rabbi Yochanan and give another suggested answer. I'm just showing that l'choira, I think all of the Gemaras were this way, and later the final revision wasn't about the wordings of the question or answers, just the order. I think that people leave that for last, and they didn't get to it here, or this is a wrong text, or no, this was the intention of Rabbi Yochanan for whatever reason. So again, we're going back now to the first kasha that Reish Lakish had against Rabbi Yochanan, that the baker of the dough, of the sourdough that was given to the baker by various women, the Mishnah said is exempt, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, it should be chayiv in challah. So Rab Chananya, this is the second time he had him in the last few daf. Rab Chananya, we said, was the brother of the famous Rabbi. Rab Chananya, who didn't have smicha. So he called himself the chaver of the rabbis. I think he was proud with that. He's the Rab Chananya, chaver, the Rabbanan Boi. Boi doesn't mean he asked the question. He's actually giving another answer for Rabbi Yochanan. That afafilu yesh bikulen kishir. That in the Mishnah and Chala, even though, yeah, I gave my example, there were 5 women, each woman gave 1 pound of flour. When the baker put it together, you have the 5 pounds. It's not that you have 5 pounds. It's not Gemar Melacha. It's not even Gemar Melacha. Now, why would it not even be Gemar Melacha? So let me go back, guys. What's the Gemar Melacha for Chala? The Gemar Melacha for Chala is kneading the flour and the water. As we mentioned, the sourdough that the Mishnah is talking about is not for the people that want to make a sourdough challah. No, it's about people that want to use that as what we use yeast for. Now, where would you put the owner, where would the owner put it? He's going to have flour and water. Prior to kneading other flour and water, that's the way they did it. That's the way we do it now. You put all, today we add ingredients. Some people have to add poison to everything. So they put the poison of the sugar, then they put some salt. Did you get a heart attack if you don't die from that? Then they put eggs, whatever people put into the 100% unbleached, whatever they call that. You put the sourdough into flour and water prior to it being kneaded. This is a Gavaldike approach. Now, we learned a lot. Let's speak about the case of the wine. Just one example. What's the Gemar Malach of wine when you skim the sediment off the top of the Beira Tachten? What happens if you put wine into the pitcher, we said, before that skimming? The fact that you plan to use it could be a problem because you're declaring that for you it's ready to be consumed. But it's not going to be a problem because since your intention is that whatever you will not finish, you're pouring back into the boir, anything that you can argue, reached Gemar Melacha, but the owner's intention is to bring it back to its earlier stage, that Gemar Melacha doesn't count as Gemar Melacha. So that's a great approach. Since the sourdough is going to be put into flour and water prior to it being kneaded, the kneading of the dough is the Gemar Melacha for Chala. It's going to be brought back there. That's why it's butter. Let's read it inside. The Amar, Rabbi Yossi, B'Shem Rab Ze'edan, the name of Rabbi Lazar, that af b'mashe belagin, the case that I just spoke out, that when you put wine into a pitcher prior to skimming it, but you plan to drink from that wine, the din is that even though you already put it in a pitcher, it's sitting on your table, you would argue, well, for you, it's mamish gemar malachet, you're going to consume it. Still, loy nitbal. And why is that? Because if you will not finish the pitcher, you will put it back into that vat. So we don't consider its placement in the pitcher as gemar malacha. Same thing will be over here. This product, this sourdough is destined, that's the purpose. Its purpose is for it to be mixed into an unfinished product. And the unfinished product is not into other dough. You put it in there before the baker needs the current bread. First, you gather all the ingredients, including a piece of sourdough. It's going to be placed into flour prior to its kneading. That's why the sourdough itself never has to be tied. Now, this will be very problematic with the next Mishnah that the Gemara brought. Because according to this logic, sourdough never reached Gemar Malacha, right? What was the next Mishnah that we learned today? That if the Nachtim owns the flour and he needs it together, we said chayiv. The Gemara didn't even go back and forth here. So this is the beauty of the Yerushalmi. They held higher of us. They gave us enough information to know how to deal with this. I don't know how to answer that question, but at least to acknowledge that. Okay, let's go. It's a bit late, even though we're fine. So the Mishnah went through a list of items that will be better identified. The first item is called the garlic of Balbechi. We said Balbechi machlokes. Either Balbechi, Bechi, Shem Makoim, or Bechi is the name of a type of garlic which makes you cry. It's very sharp garlic. That garlic at the times of Chazal was not grown in the Holy Land. So even though you bought it in the Holy Land, you don't have to tithe it. It's Yodua. It was grown outside. Let's identify it. So it asks the Gemara, Ezu Shum Balbechi, what is this garlic? Kol she'ein loi elochur echad makev v'so'amar. I'm happy with Kavan, that normally you have the stem of the garlic, and around the stem you have many little bulbs. It's a type of species, it's a type of strain of garlic that there is only one. There can be many, there can be 4 or 5 around the stem, but there isn't multi-layers. There's only one row of cloves around the central stalk. That's how you can notice. Or Amar Rab Shimon ben Gamliel, no, Kol she'ein lo ela klipa achas. It only has a single layer of peel surrounding its head. And ordinarily, this I know, that garlic, I'm talking about outside the outer bulb. There isn't one layer, there's a couple. They're all very thin, but there isn't only one. That's how you identify this Balbechi. Next, the Mishnah spoke about Batzel Shal Richba. Here also we said either Richba Shem Makay. It's the name of a place. That was the name of the guy. It primarily grew in that place, or Richba means to flow. And what I'm saying now will not fit according to one of the explanations, that it made your tears flow. But we'll see maybe the opposite. So how do you identify this Batzel of Richba that does not need to be tithed, not even rabbinically? So either it's a type of onion called sho'uktzoi nimach letoichoi, that the stem is pressed into the body of the onion. Kevin, that's a bad picture. I love you, but the picture is nish richtig. Okay. Or no, the opposite. It's a type of onion that has no venom, a type of onion that has no sharpness. Richba Rabban Gamliel is not making your tears flow. It's the mother, you're crying that you're not crying. It's one of those mud. There's no sharpness at all. Next, then the Mishnah spoke about grisin hakilkin. Now we're going to teach this in English, Sicilian beans. So how does one identify these beans? Now we're getting into it. Elo hamirubayim. They are square-shaped beans. I know nowadays you can buy square-shaped stuff, but this is all fake news. I know in some places in the world you get square watermelons. That's because they put a mold while it's growing for you to be able to store it better in your fridge. But when he said that, how does one identify these kilkin, these Sicilian beans? They're squared. The Gemara says, no. Honey, we learned in a Braisa, and now we're going to get into some type of agadata, which is, I think, relatively common towards the end of a Masechta, very deep, that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Oimer, ein meruba misheshis yemei bereishis. That when God, in the natural order, in the world that God created, that's his expression, nothing, we're gonna limit that soon, is square. So don't come and tell me that Sicilian bean is square. There isn't in nature a plant or a fruit or a legume or a bean that's square. The Gemara says, why not? Instead of proving this statement wrong from reality, which is completely irrelevant, we're going to only prove it wrong from another place in Torah. So, frek the Gemara, Hasev Rav Berechia. There's a Mishnah in the Goyim. We're speaking about certain blemishes of discoloration on the human body. And there is a certain minimum amount. Gufa shel baheres. What's the minimum size of this baheres blemish? Kegris hakilkali meruba, like a squared Sicilian bean. The Mishnah says it's square. So the Gemara says the opposite. The Mishnah says it's not square. Because if Sicilian bean by nature would have been square, then the Mishnah should have says, what's the minimum size of a beheres? Kagris hakilkali. The fact that the Mishnah says kagris hakilkali hamaruba, that means like in other areas in halacha, like by Yasuka, that you put this bean, by nature the bean is circular. It doesn't have to mean a perfect circle, but it's not square, and make a square around it, and that's the minimum size. A bean that you have to square, not that's naturally squared, if not the Mishnah, mayim achreinim vaser. Money out of an ATM. The M is already the money. It's superfluous. Amar Rav Bisna, the opposite. Kol garma amrat lei. The very source that you brought as a question is the source of the answer. The fact that the Mishnah has to say the word square proves that it's not naturally squared. There is no such a thing as naturally squared. The word square is the yad ba'ana, like we mentioned, that it must be equal. What's the minimum size of a behead? A discoloration with whatever shade from the shnaim shen arba, right? Really 4 different options of white skin. How large? Put a Sicilian bean, put around it a square with all of the cheshbonis of math. We'll leave for another time in Masechta Sukkah, and let's go by. Says the Gemara, but there is in nature something square. So here we go, Kevan. Either nana might mean mint. I actually Googled it yesterday, and you'll see that the stem of a mint is square. It's fascinating. So there is a square part of nature. The stem of the mint, if you cut it, it's going to be squared. Now, there are others who say that the girsa is not nana, right? Who says nana for mint? In Moroccans, it's not that uncommon. Israel. Yakir has what to say. Okay.
See,
there's
Farsi
kua.
and Arabic.
Kua, if it's kua is some sort of tree. There's some sort of tree that has a 4-sided square trunk. There is. So the Gemara answers, you're right. It's square, but it's filled with knobs. It's not smooth square. It's not perfectly square. The knee joint, the knee joint of an elephant, square. God created the elephants b'sheshis and me'bereshis. So the Gemara says, no. It's square, but underneath it, it's rounded. So if you look at an elephant, at their knee, you're in big trouble if you're that close. But you should know that the square is only what's protruding outside. Underneath it, it's rounded. I know it's late, but we have to finish it. So, the Gemara says, whoa, 1 second. That he was only speaking about living creatures. He was not talking about plants, just to know that. There are squared plants. In animal life, nothing is square. And indeed, we learned befedish and abraisa that there is such a thing as natural meruba ba'icholin. There are certain squares that we find in natural plants. I just want to say the following: that kiyudua, the Rebbe mamash beruach hakodesh, and or together with the Rebbe's pashut's knowledge, the Rebbe knew that the menorah and the Beis Hamikdash, the branches were diagonal; they were not rounded, which was it only. A Rebbe can come out with that because the oldest symbol that we have as Jewish people is not what people think the Magen David. The oldest symbol is the menorah, and there were certainly in the courtyards of the Beis Hamikdash menorahs, candelabras that were rounded, as we have on the Arch of Titus, right? But they were not the mitzvah menorah that was given later after the Rebbe came out with that. It's amazing, the courage. Then we found a drawing of the Rambam where the Rambam did that. But one of the rationales behind what the Rebbe was saying was really connected to our sugya. Circular shapes represent the world prior to human rectification. In the Sheishas, Yemei Bereshis, nature is rounded. Squaring, I don't only mean a square. Making something perfectly angled is our contribution, lasois l'sakan, to the world. Our perfecting of the world. And therefore, there is a logic, aside of the fact that now we know it was taka straight, but there is a logic behind it, is that's our kavan of building the Mishkan, of building the Beis Hamikdash, of bringing order to something that prior was not organized, establishing a calendar. That's not something natural, that's something that we do. We make a seder. And with that, the seder